What's going on, Mountaineer Nation? Welcome back into the CRW podcast here for episode 203 here in season 7. It's going to be a little combo here for you. We're going to get into our Kansas State review and reaction, and then we're going to look ahead and provide our Arizona preview and predictions here in this episode as well. Been hard getting, schedules to line up between me, Steven, and Bradley. As you can see, just me here tonight for this one. Obviously, Steven and Bradley out on assignment, but also, I think it's not only just hard to get schedules to line up right now. I think just the state of things within the West Virginia football program, the mood, just the way things are kind of trending has made it, honestly, to be quite honest with you, pretty kind of hard to want to put out content, want to put out and come here and record and talk about this team, talk about the episodes. It's really just kind of an apathetic feeling going on throughout Mountaineer Nation right now. And we share in that with you as well. So if you're feeling that way, don't feel bad. It's just kind of the way things are right now. Unfortunately, after West Virginia falls yet again in a Big 12 game, in a Big 12 night game at home against a ranked team, Neal Brown continues his struggles against a ranked team. And I think in a lot of ways, it's kind of fitting that this game against Kansas State and Chris Kleiman is the game that really kind of took a lot of people that were maybe still on the fence about Neal Brown and on the fence of the direction of this football team and kind of turned them all the way around to where they're now against it. And pretty much I haven't seen anyone, to a man within Mountaineer Nation that is really on board with Neal Brown and where things are at now currently. And, that's a big testament coming from a lot of people, including some of us here on the CRW podcast. I know Steven couldn't be here for this episode. Bradley couldn't as well, but I do believe they share in my thoughts. Bradley said as much already. And, Steven had texted me that as well, that, he felt like he's finally off the Neal Brown train. And that was prior to this game against Kansas State. So, and we've been some of the most staunch and ardent defenders of Neal Brown as well. You look back there is a Trust to Climb hat. For those of you guys watching the video version, that's what I'm pointing to there on the audio side. I know you can't see it, but got a Trust to Climb hat right there in the background. I've got another Trust to Climb hat. I got a Trust to Climb shirt. So we were fully bought in. We were supporters of Neal Brown, just like a lot of people were. Everyone said, home run hire, great grades, A+ hire for West Virginia. And I think it goes to show a lot of times, hiring coaches is a bit of a crapshoot. And for West Virginia, it looks like this one's not going to go their way. Who knows what could happen in the future? I'm not predicting anything, but I'm just saying right now at this point, it's hard to believe that this ends up any other way but than with West Virginia and Neal Brown parting ways, whether that's at the end of the season, whether that's in a couple of years. But right now, it's just hard to believe things turning around from what we've seen thus far. And what I say about it being, ironic or maybe poetic that it's Kansas State and Chris Kleiman that kind of made me completely, off the Neal Brown train and a lot of people completely off the Neal Brown train is because if you think back and remember, both West Virginia and Kansas State were making the coach hirings, in the same offseason there. Kansas State doing theirs a little bit earlier than West Virginia back in, 2019 would be their first year for Chris Kleiman and the first year for Neal Brown. But interestingly enough, even more so there is the fact that Kansas State interviewed Neal Brown. Kansas State had kind of already decided they were probably going to hire Chris Kleiman, but Neal Brown was available. We knew about his record at Troy, the 3 straight 10-win seasons. So they said, hey, let's just give him an interview at least. And they give Neal Brown an interview at Kansas State. And he impresses them so much in the interview, it makes them start second guessing. Hey, maybe we should hire him and not hire Chris Kleiman. But they decide, now let's go with our original choice, the way we originally were feeling it. Let's go with our gut. Let's go with Chris Kleiman. So Chris Kleiman goes to Kansas State. Of course, a little bit later, Neal Brown would end up at West Virginia. And it's interesting now to compare the two since then because West Virginia thought they got a steal, but it turns out Kansas State probably made the correct decision. And that's what I want to get into some interesting things of note here for this episode because we're going to start off with Chris Kleiman versus Neal Brown. Some of these coming from X here. Find the one here I've got for Chris Kleiman and Neal Brown as soon as I can find it here. There we are. And I'll share it on the screen for you guys tuning in on the video version there. But a little bit of perspective, as I mentioned, not only comparing these two because they started at the same time, but also the things that went into it, where Kansas State could have hired Neal Brown. West Virginia ends up with them after Kansas State chose Chris Kleiman. And since then, 2019, both these coaches in the same era, Neal Brown at West Virginia, Chris Kleiman at Kansas State. Neal Brown is 34 and 33 overall. Barely over 50% winning percentage. Chris Kleiman, 41 and 25 overall in that same time, 62% winning percentage. In the Big 12, Neal Brown is 22 and 26, only winning close to 46% of his Big 12 games, whereas Chris Kleiman, 29 and 20 in the Big 12, winning 59% of his Big 12 games, and also the big one here, the check mark in Kansas State's corner, something West Virginia still hasn't really come close to sniffing since they've been in the Big 12, because they haven't even made an appearance in the Big 12 title game yet. Should have in 2018, didn't. That's probably the closest you could say that they've gotten to it. And, us as Mountaineer fans, some have said we have too high of expectations, but I don't think it's too far-fetched at all to say, when you've been in a conference a decade or more, to at least make an appearance in one conference title game. I could live with that appearance in a conference title game per decade, because we're not even getting that currently. And Chris Kleiman has a Big 12 championship back in 2022 at Kansas State. Kansas State's also been ranked every season he's been the coach. West Virginia has yet to be ranked in the AP Bowl under Neal Brown in 6 years since 2019, and their average highest ranking per season at Kansas State is 17th. Shout out to Football Dude on X there for providing those numbers, but definitely goes hand in hand with what I wanted to start this episode off with, that comparison between Neal Brown and Chris Kleiman, because it's pertinent after Kansas State dominates West Virginia. They've already won one Big 12 title in his tenure. They're in competition for another one. This was supposed to be the year West Virginia competed for one, and he matches up against a coach that, he was hired the same year as, a coach that he was up for the same job for there at Kansas State. And I think now we see why Kansas State passed and chose Chris Kleiman, and why Neal Brown was, a coach with such great promise that was available so late there in that cycle. Maybe some other teams kind of sniffed out some of this stuff earlier, and West Virginia kind of got some fool's gold when they hired Neal Brown, or at least that's how it's looking right now as we stand currently. And just some more numbers to kind of back that up here. Let's get into some more stats. Interesting things of note here continuing before we talk about the Big 12 games from this weekend. We'll wrap up those with a little recap before we shift gears and look ahead to then Arizona. I'll get into a preview of that game, provide my key to victory and my score prediction. Then we'll wrap up with a Big 12 preview for this upcoming weekend, and I'll make my picks for the winners in the matchups within the conference. But here we are. Another one. This one is from Wolfpack here on X. We are 6-24 against teams that have finished the season over 500 under Neal Brown's leadership. So in the Neal Brown era, when playing teams that finished the season with a winning record, so winning teams, we are 6-24. That's one. Then also from the same account here on X, in the Neal Brown era, we are now 3-18 versus teams ranked in the top 25, 0 appearances in season in the AP top 25, 0-5 on homecoming. Yes, Kansas State, that was another homecoming game, and we lost that one. So winless on homecoming, 1-2 versus Pitt, 22-26 in conference, as we mentioned there briefly earlier there. Another one that I wanted to bring up. And then from Nate Arthur here on X, WVU hasn't beaten an FBS team in the regular season who finished with more than 7 wins since 2019. And of course, that was Neal Brown's first year at WVU. So pretty much in the Neal Brown era, say that one more time, WVU hasn't beaten an FBS team in the regular season who finished with more than 7 wins. Never happened. And then one of the kickers here from Heartland College Sports, I'm going to share this one on screen with you guys. Heartland College Sports does great Big 12 coverage, but they state this one, which really kind of twists the knife a little bit here for Mountaineer Nation, because this is one of the worst stats when you see this one, put out in writing. The Mountaineers are 34-33 under sixth-year head coach Neal Brown. That's on pace to be the worst 6-year stretch under one coach at West Virginia since Gene Corum went 29-30 from 1960 to 1965. So what's happening right now is, one of the worst eras of Mountaineer football in, what are we talking, 70, 80 years almost. 34-33 is on pace to be the worst 6-year stretch since 1960 through 1965. So the Neal Brown era, man, it's down, and you guys probably saw the video I did on the Country Roads Webcast YouTube channel. If you listen to the podcast on the audio side, be sure to come over to the CRW YouTube to get extra WVU football content. But I did a video talking about just the quarterbacks and how they've regressed in the Neal Brown era, and you can go look at that as well to see that with numbers behind it, backed by stats and grades. Each quarterback since the beginning in 2019, if they were a one-year starter, by the time it was the end of their starting year, they were playing a lot worse than they were at the beginning. They end up getting benched. If they were a 2-year starter, they may start off hot in their first year, but their second year, there's a big drop off. And we're seeing that trend continue yet again this year with Garrett Green. So I don't really want to put it on him. No, he's battling an injury right now. He's one of the toughest players I've ever seen come through WVU, to be quite honest with you. And I like Garrett Green a lot, but I think it's more of an issue of the coaching there, that the quarterbacks continue to regress the longer that they're the starter at WVU under Neal Brown. And there are just some numbers to back up there and interesting things of note, some stuff that people are feeling in regards to the Neal Brown era and why a lot of people aren't very happy right now and want to see changes made. And I think the atmosphere and the fan base is getting too loud. The noise is getting too loud for, the athletic department at WVU to be able to ignore it. At the end of the season, something's going to have to change. I don't know if they're going to move on from Neal Brown. I think that's probably the direction they should go at this point, if you want my personal opinion. But there's going to have to be at least some type of staff changes, something mandated to really help Mountaineer Nation feel like this university and this athletic department cares about this football program, because right now things are not heading in a good direction, with no signs of slowing down. When you look at the numbers there, with a wider perspective, some of those, not only just from this year, which has gone awry. And I think a big reason a lot of people are fed up and really loud with the way they're discontent is just because the way that this coaching staff hyped this team up in the offseason and the preseason, saying this was the deepest, this was the best at multiple units, saying this looked like a conference competitor. So they got a lot of people really bought in and built the hype up to a point that it hadn't been at since probably, 2018. People were also like, okay, this is year 6, so it probably is true. He probably does have his guys. And, if they did feel that way and weren't lying to us, then that goes against their evaluation of talent, which I think is something that also has been an issue when you look at issues through this era. Obviously, their evaluation of talent in the transfer portal has been pretty bad overall. They've hit a couple of big hits, Beanie Bishop being the largest. Charles Woods was a good one as well, just didn't end up working out in the end. Other than that, the way they've been able to, go after defensive backs in the portal, every single one's been a miss this year, and most throughout the past few years have, save for those 2 examples I just presented. And then, of course, that's, evaluation of talent. Then you talk development of talent. We go back to what I was talking about with the quarterbacks there. So there are select areas where West Virginia has improved. There are good coaches on this staff. I think Matt Moore's done a phenomenal job with the offensive line. I think Chad Scott's done a good job with the running backs. I think that Andrew Jackson's phenomenal with what he does with the defensive line. So there are good coaches on this WVU staff, but just there's some disconnect because everything else throughout the program seems to be good. They do good with the nutrition side. They do good with the workout side, the recovery, the management of the program overall has been good. Recruiting has been on par with what we've done in the past, and really some big time hitters in there along with that. So, but I just don't know, but there is some disconnect in this program that's not leading to wins on the field. And that's the main thing that matters at the end of the day. Unfortunately, you can be great at everything else, but if you aren't winning football games, you aren't getting it done. And so I think that's why a lot of the fan base is feeling the way that they are right now, and, rightfully so. And they have the right to, demand more. Like I said, we as West Virginia fans should be competing for Big 12 conference titles, especially in the new makeup of this conference this year where it was wide open, where you had so much coming back from a 9-win team. And because the answer, the question that remains after all this is, if not this year, then when would it happen? And if you're having one of your worst years and what was supposed to be one of your best years, that's a big sign right there. So hopefully, I think we're all throughout the fan base seeing these signs. And I know Ren Baker is a smart guy. He's proven that to us. So there's no way he's not seeing this as well. And something is going to have to be done probably at the end of this season. So that's just kind of my thoughts there to just kind of put the Kansas State game behind us. I'm not going to get into any stats here on this episode. I just wanted to briefly talk about the Neal Brown and Chris Kleiman scenario because I thought that was an interesting angle that hit some interesting news of note. Now let's talk about the Big 12 scores from this past weekend, do a little recap there. Then we'll shift our focus to Arizona and talk about the upcoming game for the Mountaineers, provide a preview there, some key to victory, and a score prediction for that one. But first, let's talk about Big 12, do a wrap-up from Week 8 in the conference here. Take a look at the previous scores that went down this past week in the conference. We had, of course, on Friday, looked like Oklahoma State was going to come out after the bye week. I'd made this pick in the preview episode that I thought Oklahoma State would come out and really perform well in this game because it was off the bye week, and we've seen Gundy, even as early as last year after the bye week really changed the team and they come out playing better. They do come out with a new quarterback. He ends up getting hurt. Maybe that changed things a little bit, but Bowman actually, played well when he had to get thrust in there, and it still looked like Oklahoma State was going to win this football game, but BYU puts the drive together, and they're almost just seeming like a team of destiny right now, remaining unbeaten on the year. 38-35, they take down Oklahoma State in Provo in what was the Friday game there. Then when we get into our Saturday slate, Cincinnati getting the home win over Arizona State, a team, both these teams have really kind of surprised this season. I really like Sorbsby there at Cincinnati. I think that's what's made the difference to allow them to make this big leap is quarterback play, because last year they were still good, in the trenches. They had a good running back. They had good receiver there with Henderson, and they still have all that intact, but now they've really upgraded the quarterback position. It's made a difference. Cincinnati takes down Arizona State 24-14. Kansas finally gets the win they've been searching for. They've been so close, throughout Big 12 play, losing on, last second drives, losing at the end of games. And then finally they go back home. Well, not technically their home field. We know that story throughout the season. They go to Kansas City and they play Houston in a home game, and they do take care of Houston 42-14. Houston, they've had their moments where they've looked better than expected, but for the most part, looks like a team that's going to sit there at the bottom of the conference throughout this season. We'll take a look at the standings updated after this week momentarily once we get through the scores. And how about Colorado? Talk about a team that's really turned things around already, a quick turnaround, it seems, for Coach Prime there. We'll see how things go for them throughout the latter portion of the season, but definitely have overperformed my expectations by a long shot, and I think a lot of others would probably agree there. 34-7 win over Arizona on the road, absolutely dominating. I think the story at Colorado has been their defensive improvements. They've really done a lot better job on that side this season, and that's allowing for a lot better, performances for them, and for the most part doing a better job of pass protection. If they can do a better job running the football overall, you're talking about a team that really could be a legitimate competition here in this for this Big 12 championship. So 34-7, Colorado takes down Arizona, and then Baylor really coming out of nowhere here with a 59-point performance there for the Baylor Bears. How about that Jake Spavital offense there at Baylor? He's the offensive coordinator there. I think we've talked about that in the past, but Dave Aranda's back against the wall. His seat, one of the hottest in the conference. Maybe Neal Brown's there with him now as well, but not a lot of people expected them to go into Lubbock and dominate the way that they did. Baylor hasn't played terrible on offense this year. It really kind of been their defenses that have been the issues, but this performance was super unexpected, especially on the road there in Lubbock, which is usually a pretty difficult place to play. But they handle Texas Tech, who had been sitting up there near the top of the Big 12 standings, 59-35. Baylor takes down the Red Raiders. And then, of course, we talked about the Mountaineers falling yet again, unfortunately, now to 3-4 in the season and 2-2 in conference play. Kansas State remains a conference competitor there with a drubbing of 45-18, of course. And then Iowa State, 38-35 over UCF at home. But guys, UCF dominated this football game. They ran all over Iowa State, 300 some rushing yards, if I'm not mistaken, and looked like they were going to win this thing. Iowa State was down big. They put together a big comeback at the end and engineer a game-winning drive, mainly behind Rocco Becht for the most part. A lot of the running backs of Iowa State really weren't the ones that were making the big plays. I think all three of them combined, had less than 10 carries each, if I'm not mistaken. But Rocco Becht, not even just throwing the football, but running the football, got it done. He ran in the winning score and the 2-point conversion, if I'm not mistaken. 20 carries, 97 yards. Rocco Becht puts the team on his back at home for a come-from-behind win over UCF, and Iowa State remains unbeaten. It ranked in the top 10 nationally in college football. And TCU continues to send Utah reeling down to 1-3 in the conference now. Are the Utah Utes? Hey, if there's anything that we called right this offseason, the coaches may have misled us a little bit and had us a little bit bought in too much to WVU drinking that golden blue Kool-Aid and having those golden blue glasses on. But we did say Utah would not come into this conference and dominate in year one, and we have been right about that. TCU handles them 13-7. So that's the results in Week 8 in the Big 12. Let's take a look at the standings now for the conference here as we move forward and look ahead a little bit to Week 9 in the Big 12 Conference. All right, standings-wise here, we've got BYU and Iowa State remaining as the unbeatens in the Big 12 Conference at 4-0 each in the conference, 7-0 overall. Kansas State 3-1, 6-1, of course, after their win against West Virginia. At third there, Colorado also 3-1 in the conference, 5-2 overall. Texas Tech did take the loss to fall to 3-1. They're 5-2 at number 5. So that's your top 5. Cincinnati kind of tied there with them as well now after their win, 3-1, 5-2. So there's your top teams in the conference. Get down towards the middle, and then of course the bottom half here: Arizona State at 7, TCU at 8, West Virginia at 9, Utah at 10, Baylor at 11, UCF at 12, Arizona at 13, Kansas at 14, Houston at 15, Oklahoma State at 16. And, of course, you see got two teams in kind of the bottom half of the conference here, West Virginia 9th and Arizona in 13th as we look at the standings here, set to battle it out this week. And that's what we're going to get into now as we shift gears and look ahead to the matchup with the Wildcats and get into our Arizona State preview and predictions here on episode 203 of the CRW podcast. All right, and surprise, surprise, had one of the co-hosts pop in here to join me for the preview side of things. So you'll get not only my preview, but we'll get Brad's as well and get his key to victory and score prediction also. Ready to dive in against the matchup with the Wildcats. Brad, how's it going, man?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm ready for it, but it is what it is, and it's going to be an interesting game, if anything. So,
Yeah, that's true. That's for sure. That's definitely the point in the season where we're at is we don't really know what to expect now moving forward. I think we're expecting the worst and hoping for the best, hoping to be surprised if nothing else, just with the way things are trending right now. And I guess, for Arizona, they could probably, feel a similar way. Both teams coming into this game at 3-4 overall. West Virginia, a slightly better conference record at 2-2. Arizona sitting at 1-3, but should be an interesting matchup there as West Virginia heads to Tucson. It'll be a 7 p.m. Eastern kick on October 26th. So technically 4 o'clock there where they're playing in Arizona. And this one will be televised on Fox Sports 1. Head coach Brent Brennan in his first season there at Arizona after coming over from San Jose State. Kind of an overall look there. But opening thoughts heading into this one, Brad, before we get into the matchups. We'll take a look at it on both sides from both angles there. But what are kind of your opening thoughts before we get into it there a little bit further?
yeah, really, and I don't think it's going to be very matchup specific right now. I think it's going to be mostly just focusing on our program. Um, it's we're in a weird spot, man. I say now there's rumors rolling around. You had the drop from the Ben Booth show the other day talking about somebody knows that Neal Brown's fired at the end of this year. Again, I don't
Yeah.
know how serious that is. People say he's got some inside information, but I really just don't know if there's a decision yet. Because you hear some more conversation from people that are a little bit more connected, and you're not hearing anything like that. That there's that kind of movement. There's definitely discussions being had, but I would definitely there's no decision made of he's gone at the end of this year. That's just my realistic thinking.
Same.
Um, and so I don't know what he would have to do this year to save. I think you got to win out at least. I mean, you're going one more loss, and you're already at a worse record than you were at last year. And so that's one thing. Again, you're regressing, not climbing, and the mountains start to look more like a cliff. you
Yeah.
know, and so um, it's you got to go in, and especially with this game, we're gonna have so many backups and such a different team playing that it's probably not going to be really the team that we've seen the whole year up to this point. To be real with you, and so if you
Sure.
want to go look at what our team might look like next year, all things stay the same. This is going to be it. So, if you are even some of the most pessimistic Mountaineers, um, these are still people in our program, and it's going to give you a good look at what we might be able to keep, no matter who's the coach here in the future, or what we might be losing and who we need to hold on to. So it's going to be a different one.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree 100%, man. And I think that's one thing I was talking about earlier in the show before you came in was, that's just kind of how I look at Neal Brown and his tenure now at this point is if not this year, then when? This was probably your best
Yeah,
chance and you're having one of your worst seasons. So that's something that Ren Baker, I think, has to keep in mind. But I do like what you mentioned there as far as West Virginia going into this game, not only the state of things within, the program and the fan base, how far that down that is, but also, the health of the team in question right now as well. Aubrey Burks is out for this game yet again, going to be the second straight game he's out. But then you look to the offensive side at this point that we're recording. Things may change later in the week. We'll maybe find out some more on Neal Brown's radio show on Thursday. But for now, Jaheim White is one they said they feel good about potentially playing, but they said it was too early to tell on Garrett Green and Wyatt Milam's status. That's your quarterback and your left tackle. So you could be playing Nico Markio and Johnny Williams respectively at those two positions. So something to keep in mind. But we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the West Virginia offense against the Arizona defense. Let's lead it off talking about the other side there, Brad. Let's talk a little bit about this Arizona offense going up against the Mountaineers defense first. Arizona offense led by offensive coordinator Dino Babers, of course, the former Syracuse head coach. West Virginia knows him, matched up with him multiple times there. He actually faced the end of the Dana Holgerson era. Last game that we played there was that Camping World Bowl against Syracuse. Babers was still their head coach at the time. So his first year as offensive coordinator at Arizona. And he's got some weapons, particularly at the wide receiver position, where he has the best receiver in the Big 12 and one of the best receivers in the country in Tetaroa McMillan, better known as T-Mac, leads the Big 12 in receiving yards, 780 on the year. Noah Fafita at quarterback, a bit of a mixed bag this season, but does have 1774, 59% completion rating, 9 TDs versus 10 interceptions, though. But they do have some good running backs as well. Don't be confused to think they're only a passing outfit, because they do have two running backs that are both averaging over 5 yards per carry, and Quali Conley and Kedrick Riscano. Conley has 500 yards on the season and 6 touchdowns, and Riscano has 241 yards and a touchdown of his own on the season. Going up against the West Virginia defense, though, that has been good, on the run defense side of things, has been good in tackling. I think they lead PFF in the Big 12, both of those categories, run defense and tackling. So hopefully you'll be able to handle those running backs. But it's the other side of things that I'm worried about in this game, Brad, that Arizona passing attack going up against what's been a suspect West Virginia passing defense pretty much all season. And I think last week against Kansas State, that really reared its head yet again against a Kansas State passing offense that wasn't even that prolific, but they certainly looked that way against West Virginia. So what are your thoughts on this Arizona offense with a weapon like T-Mac on the outside going up against West Virginia?
Yeah, I mean, we have not seen anybody like T Mac in a minute. T Mac's incredibly talented. I think that what you go to now when you're really looking at this side of the ball is the changes, right? Last few weeks we've just been killed on dinks and dunks, and then all of a sudden you go a little up tempo and you let one bomb go over your head. You can't let that happen this week. And I know you're going up against probably a better opponent than, in that aspect. You got a better wide receiver that can pull that off more than anybody else, but it's happened to you. They're going to try to do it, and as a coaching staff, you've got to make a change to that. You got to find some way to kind of help correct those issues. And if you don't, to me, that's just another tick in the box of the inability to adapt, really, is what it comes down to. So, but again, you're missing Aubrey Burks. You're missing some really quality back there in that back end. Our front end's getting beat up more and more, so that pressure's falling off. So, really, man, looking for the linebackers. They got to step up and get better at coverage. Elite run game stoppers, but they're just a bit of a liability when it comes to stopping the ball when it's in the air.
It's a good point. It's a good point there, and it's a bad combination when most of your cornerbacks. That's what I mentioned earlier. Pretty much all your transfers that you brought in have been misses, and then your linebackers are super talented, super athletic, but have struggled a bit in pass coverage. Maybe it's because of some of their age, but that's not going to benefit you any in this matchup, especially where you're going to have to play a lot of zone coverage, because obviously you're not matching up T-Mac man on man with pretty much anyone on our team. That would be a terrible situation for us. You're going to have to play a lot of
Yeah,
zones. You're going to need those linebackers to step up and do a decent job in pass coverage if you want to have a chance in this one. But the one side of positivity I guess I can look at is, West Virginia, the times they've been passed on a few times this season when you look at it, like against Kansas. You can look at it against, last week against Kansas State as well, is times when West Virginia's game plan was to come in, sell out to stop the run. And if they beat us passing, hey, we'll tip our cap to them. And this game, they're not going to have that game plan. I'd say they're going to come out and try and, find a way to game plan to stop McMillan and stop the Arizona passing offense. So now you got to hope with that going on with, some of the injury statuses of Hammond Russell and TJ Jackson, who both probably going to be playing a little banged up, and you're already a little thin there on the D line, that if you're, game planning to stop the pass, then they don't hurt you with the run game, because that seems to be the issue this season. You game plan for something, whatever the team's strong at, we're like, all right, make them beat us with, the other side, then they just do it. So it's like,
yeah.
hopefully that's not what happens in this one.
So it's been the game plan. It's been a game plan that has not worked,
Yeah.
for 2 years now.
Yeah, it's been a struggle, man. It really has. And the secondary has been a constant issue pretty much all season, and doesn't show any signs of stopping. And that's what concerns me most with this matchup. So when I look at Arizona offense versus West Virginia defense, I got to give a little bit of an edge there to the Arizona offense. I think just based on past history of how these two teams play and what they're strong at and what they're weak at, because Arizona's strength definitely lines up with West Virginia's weakness in the secondary. But let's flip it over here. Let's talk about the other side now. West Virginia's offense going up against the Arizona defense, which I think has some interesting angles in this game, considering that we may see Nico Marchio at quarterback. may see Johnny Williams have to play for Wyatt Milam at left tackle. We'll see what happens at running back. If we see more C.J. Donaldson and less Jaheim, as he's battling injury as well, may even see a little Jalen Anderson involved there. But they're taking on an Arizona defense led by Dwayne Akina, his first year there as the defensive coordinator, and kind of their three standouts here, one at each level. I always kind of like to name someone there in the D line, someone in the linebacking core, and someone in the secondary for for Arizona. They got Trey Smith there on the D line, leading them with 2.5 sacks on the season. Jacob Mann leads the team in total tackles at the linebacker position with 47. And then in their defensive backfield, Genesis Smith leads the team with 2 interceptions on the year. And they also do a good job, rushing the passer, which is something to keep an eye on in this game if West Virginia has to play without Wyatt Milam and they end up having to throw the ball a little bit, because we know teams are probably keying on stopping West Virginia's run game. But, going into this one, a lot of question marks as to what faces we'll see on West Virginia's offense, and the offense overall throughout this season has been a bit of a mixed bag. Anyway, we thought they were hitting a point where they were maybe hitting their stride, and the back-to-back games where they've really struggled. I think some of that due to not having any semblance of a passing attack. You can put that on the offensive system itself, or you can put that on the receivers. Quarterback play hasn't been accurate when passing the ball, but Garrett Green has done a good job rushing the football. That's something that people hadn't pointed out really, is he did have 4 straight games with 80-plus rushing yards before he got injured. Did have 80-plus rushing yards in the first half there against Kansas State. So he still has done a good job there. If you don't have that element, maybe you do have to throw the football a little bit more. You're going to need a better performance from those receivers, and the tight end position with Cole Taylor involved as well. I think maybe in this game, Brad, it's kind of my feeling, but the Arizona pass rush does worry me a little bit. But what are your thoughts here of the West Virginia offense? Maybe a little bit less there in the department of players that they can use with some of these injuries going on. But how do you think they match up with Arizona's defense?
Yeah, a couple pieces. For one, I think we are going to see Nico get the start. That's just my initial gut feeling. Um, I think with everything going on, I think that now is as good a time as any. To be honest, going back to Arizona, a place where Nico's very comfortable with, used to playing, going to be a bit of a homecoming for him. Which Neal Brown said earlier, you'd have to ask Nico where's home for him, but I'm still sure he's going to get a warm welcome in Arizona from some of the fans and family that he has down that way. I know he's originally from Colorado, but um, I think that's going to be really interesting, and I think that it'll actually give us a little bit better chance to win, because I think it gives us more question marks. You know what we're going to do with Garrett Green. You know how we're going to run, and clearly it's been exploited this whole year. So, you put Nico in there, a guy's got a little bit more better ball discipline. I don't know if that's the right word, discipline, but better arm. Somebody can really go in and start stretching out that defense and might really be able to come out and confuse them and not know what we got going on just because it's so different. When I look at it, though, what I think is going to be most important is if Jaheim White isn't playing, which again they seem like they're pretty positive on him, but I think that we're going to have to see some more Jalen Anderson, or if Jaheim White can't really play, I think we're going to have to see more Asher, because I don't think C.J. Donaldson can do it all. I think he'll have to be in there, especially on pass plays to help with blocking. But you're going to have to get some different bodies in there to try to get a run game going, because Nico's not going to be able to get. He still can run, but I don't know if he's going to get you that 80 yards that you're going to get from Garrett Green.
Those
So I think that
explosive plays.
yeah, I think you're going to have to run those running backs a bit more and try to get them a bit more involved in the game, just in general, just to see if we can get a spark. And I mean, honestly, at this point, the running game is not really taken off in a few games now. It's been pretty stagnant. So
True.
maybe some fresh blood. Asher looked pretty good in the spring game. Granted, that was a spring game. But, the guy had a little bit of wiggle and a little bit of juice to him. So, try something, do something. Really, wide receivers, they've been a mixed bag all year. So, what we might get from them when they come out, I'm not sure. But I know Hudson Clement will have 4 catches. I know he's going to come out and have 3 or 4. So
he's been one of the one consistent ones. And Traylon Ray's had a couple good games the past 2 games. So, but you need those guys to continue to, develop, get separation and such. And like you said, the run game's been a little bit stagnant. Maybe do something to spark it. I think this is the time that you do that, when you're really kind of reeling right now. You already have to have some new faces in there on offense. Maybe get Day Farmer a few touches. Like you said, get those new running backs, the Clay Ash, the Jalen Andersons, get all those guys, some touches, maybe see what happens there. I mean, why not? Your back's completely against the wall. Your seat's just as hot as it was a couple of years ago. At this point, you got to pull out
Mhm.
all the stops, I think, moving forward, especially if you're being judged on the latter portion of this season, which you may be. We don't know what Baker's thinking, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you got to try some stuff. Got to get different with it. But I will say that has not necessarily been Neal Brown's forte. I think that's been one of the things that we've always kind of looked at and questioned is just like that inability to make a change, do something different, and try to get fresh with it. I think you see that a lot come out in his interviews too when he says, what we got is what we got. And I'm like, yeah, but how you're using it is not how you have to keep on using it.
True.
And so um, it's going to be interesting to see that aspect. I will say Neal Brown has played some of his best ball with his back against the wall, but could have said the same thing about last weekend, and we saw how that turned out. So this is another one of those ones where you're playing a bottom part of the Big 12 team. That's where you have been consistent
Yeah, I
in
was
your
about to say
tenure.
if he does win one, he'll win this one because they're not a winning team. So he he
Yeah,
gets his wins against teams that aren't winning teams. So
at least keep that consistency because once you start losing to bad teams, then you got nothing to lean your hat on.
yeah, that's very true. I do like what you mentioned there about Nico, it kind of being a homecoming for him. And if Garrett Green doesn't go, which, I kind of agree with you at this point, kind of feels like that's going to be the case. It'll be interesting that both of West Virginia's quarterbacks, Nico Markio and Ryder Burton, who would be backup in with Garrett Green out with both, West Coast guys when West Virginia goes to play their first game out there in Arizona with
Mm-hmm.
Ryder being from Colorado and then Utah. And like you said, Nico, Colorado, Arizona area. So interesting matchup, or angle to think about with this game there as well as kind of homecomings for those guys. So maybe they both would perform well. Hopefully, wouldn't have to see Ryder Burton, but especially speaking of Nico, hopefully he performs well. And I think he's going to need to, especially if he doesn't have Wyatt Milam. Like I said, that's kind of one of the things I'm watching in this matchup with West Virginia's offense versus Arizona's defense is how our pass protection can hold up against their pass rush. They have the highest graded pass rush in the Big 12, according to PFF, with a 72.6 pass rushing grade. So definitely want to keep an eye on that, right? Especially if Wyatt Milam doesn't go,
Mm-hmm.
which hopefully he's able to because he's an important player. But if not, this matchup's going to be interesting to see how it plays out because I don't think it's a key, really obvious advantage either side. Like we were talking about, Arizona's offense having the advantage over West Virginia's defense. This one seems like a little bit more even matchup. But any final thoughts on it, Brad, before we get to key to victory and then talk score prediction?
Yeah, no, I think that again, a big key for this offense has always been initial momentum. They get held back up, they're not going to be able to go. And I think the thing that's still going to be the same thing with a backup quarterback. I think that come out first scripted drive will probably look really good, and then we got to hope that we can just really capitalize after that. So,
Yeah. In-game adjustments have not been strong suit in the Neal Brown era, and they've been an issue, especially past couple of weeks as well. They've really shown, a
mhm.
disadvantage in the coaching department in game, and hopefully that doesn't happen here on the road when you need to make some good decisions and get everything done. So I agree with you. And with that being said, let's get into our keys to victory for this one. See if West Virginia can snap what has become a 2-game losing streak here in the Big 12 as they go on the road across a couple of time zones to play at Arizona. 7 o'clock Eastern, 4 o'clock that time there in Arizona. It will be for the Mountaineers there as they travel on October 26th for this game. But what's the key to getting it done, Brad? What's the key to a West Virginia victory on Saturday?
To me, I'm going to go with not panicking. Can't panic. You go in there, something goes wrong. You can't lose your head. Things go in there and they don't go right. Can't lose your head, man. Things are not good right now. The worst thing that could happen is to lose the locker room and lose any kind of fight that your team has in them. You know what I mean? That's one thing that Neal Brown has been able to keep. Again, we're looking at things that we're still holding on to. And one of those is he's never lost his team. And in his press conference, listen to it. It was very short, but I know people have a lot of their feelings about it. But to me, I felt bad for the man. You can tell he's thrown himself at this. And, I've seen some more people around the fan base now coming around saying that, hey, you can say a lot about Neal Brown, but you can't question his character. He's
True.
came here with all the right intentions and tried all the right things. Um, and so, listening to Neal Brown just like stand up there and defend his guys and talk about, these are young guys that go out there and put their body on the line more than anybody else associated with this program. Fan, coach, president. There's nobody that gives more than those kids do. Um, and I think he hurts for them. I think he really truly hurts for them because they're guys that come out and put their body on the line and give it their all. And again, like we said, there's been no reward for it, and I think he knows that too. Um, but he looked at it and he knows that getting his guys up is never going to be an issue. That he's always going to have his locker room um, together. Might not always have a hot start, but the locker room's always going to be together. And um, I really don't want to see that change, even if this is Neal Brown's last year.
Yeah.
So don't panic, man. You gotta keep your wits about you. Go in there, stick to your game plan. You know you can play some winning football. Don't let things go off the rails.
Yeah, that's a great point because right now, with the state of things, it would be really easy if things start going the wrong way. That's when you can start to see another blowout, and you've already had, two of those in a row, and you don't want to get a third on the road here against a team that you're probably more evenly matched up with. So for sure, go in there with the right mindset. If things start going wrong, just remember you've battled back for, faced adversity early this season and came back. You can still come back into the game. So I think that's a good key there is trying not to panic no matter which way things go, especially with the state of things currently. As for me, I think the key to victory, to me, it's pretty simple. We talked about it a little bit earlier. It's where West Virginia struggled this season. It's pass defense. I think, you're
Mm-hmm.
facing the best receiver in the conference, one of the best receivers in all of college football. And you have that going up against what has been one of the worst pass defenses, not only in the Big 12, but nationally. West Virginia is the worst graded pass defense in the Big 12 by a long shot with a 33.9 coverage grade, according to PFF. Everyone else in the conference is at least 50 or above. So West Virginia is 17 points below in coverage grade of everyone else in the conference, and you're going up against what's been the best receiver in the conference statistically in Tetero and McMillan there, T-Mac for Arizona. So that's the key for me is coming out and playing some pass defense and trying to stop a passing offense. If you do that, you give yourself a chance in this football game. So that's got to be my key there, which leads us to the favorite part here of these episodes here leading into games, the preview and predictions episodes, and that's the prediction side of that combination. Score prediction time, Brad. Arizona, West Virginia, Mountaineers going on the road. I hate having to pick against West Virginia so often. Seems like I've done it past few weeks now, but that's unfortunately just kind of where we are. And I'll go ahead and get mine out of the way because I'm going to continue that trend yet again, unfortunately. I just don't think this is a good matchup for West Virginia with what Arizona has there in the receiving room, especially when you look at T-Mac going up against the West Virginia defense. If the West Virginia offense is down, multiple starters, that doesn't help that as well. You're already down a piece in that secondary with Aubrey Burks. So I think all that, factored into this, and plus just kind of the direction things are heading right now. How much is everyone balled in is a question to me. Everyone else, within the program, Neal Brown says he stays off social media, but I can guarantee you not all the players on the team do. They're seeing this noise and this talk throughout the fan base. They know how everyone's feeling. How much is that affecting them? All that kind of factors into this for me. So unfortunately, I think West Virginia loses again, and I've got them losing, by 2 scores yet again. 31-21. I've got Arizona getting the win here in this one. Brad, what about you?
Yeah, not feeling that negative about it. Definitely not feeling that negative about it. Um, yeah, I think no. I think with all the pressure going on, I think that Neal Brown's more focused on this game than ever. But I think getting out of Morgantown is actually a benefit here. I think getting away from home, getting away from the noise, being able to just focus in on your team and the tasks that you have ahead of you is actually probably going to help a little bit, I think, in getting people focused in for this game. I do think it's going to be a close one. But, like you said, you brought it up earlier, North Fita has been pretty pick heavy this year, and West Virginia's not really capitalized on this. So I think that we're due for some. I think that we're due for some, and I think that having some new fresh blood back there that we may get beat. I think that you've seen Josiah Jackson and some of them really try to jump on these balls, and I think they're due for some. And I think that that's really what's going to come through and help push those things over the edge. Could have been a key to victory as well, but um, I'm going to go very close one. I think it's going to be a little lower scoring than we expect because I think that we're going to have a good plan. I think it's going to be 28-27, and I think the Mountaineers are going to come out with a win.
Okay, I like it. I like it. I love you feeling a little bit better about it than I do, and ending us with some optimism here in our predictions this week. So 1 loss and 1 win is our predictions here on the show this week for the upcoming game against Arizona, where things haven't gone right for West Virginia in recent weeks. They need a game to get right. They need to turn things around, get back to 500. So I definitely hope that you're right on that one, Brad. But speaking of being right or wrong, I've probably been wrong more than I've been right in our Around the Big 12 segment, but it's time to make some decisions in that aspect again and see how we end up with our Around the Big 12 segment. To wrap up the episode, we'll look ahead to week 9 in the conference here and make our picks in the other Big 12 games now that we've talked about the Mountaineers extensively in this matchup with Arizona and giving our preview, let's talk about the rest of the conference coming up here on Saturday, October 26th, leading it off with BYU and UCF at 3:30 there in Orlando on ESPN. Last week I would have probably said BYU wins this one handedly, but UCF surprised me, nearly pulling the upset on the road at Iowa State. Iowa State coming from behind and winning that one. So I'm going to say closer than I would have expected, but BYU is going to get another win. I think that they just kind of seem like a team of destiny to me at this point, and I got to go with the Cougars. So I'm going BYU here in this one. What about you, Brad?
I've been burnt on UCF all year, especially at the bounce house. So this time, I'm just going to do the exact same. I think UCF had a little bit of energy last time. They get them back home. They're feeling a little bit better about themselves after that big emotional loss. They get another chance. I think there's an upset in the bounce house. Again, been wrong about that a lot this year, but feeling good about this one.
Yeah, that they're going to get somebody. They've been so close. I think it's going to happen too. So it's definitely a possibility. We'll see how it plays out. Oklahoma State and Baylor next at 3:30 on ESPN Plus. Interesting matchup between two teams that really, had kind of bounce back performances last week. Oklahoma State came off the bye week, performed well. Gundy righted the ship. They just couldn't quite close it out against BYU. And then Baylor, of course, pulled a big stunner on the road in Lubbock, dominating Texas Tech. So both these teams seem to be trending up after kind of tougher starts. But I'm going to go with the Bears because they did end up winning that game. So that probably helped their mindset a little bit more. And, playing at home maybe gives them a little bit of an advantage. I want to go Oklahoma State. I don't want to pick against Gundy, but I've been riding him all season and he's been, getting so close, but not getting over that hump. So this time I'm going to pick Baylor and maybe that'll will Gundy to victory. But
No,
that's what I'm going with the Bears. What about you, Brad?
it could be, yeah, but we're not getting friendly on these apparently because I think Baylor blew their load. I think they got their win. I still just don't think it's a super sound team, and I think that, like you said, I think Mike Gundy is dying for that win, and it's going to come sooner rather than later. So I'm going to go Oklahoma State on this one on the road.
I like it, man. I'm a fan of Gundy, and I think that they very well could
Or
win
apparently,
that
I'm just picking
game.
all road teams this weekend.
Hey, it could be a week where the road wins happen. You never know. Speaking of going on the road, though, Texas Tech going on the road to TCU for a 3:30 kick there on Fox. I've been riding the home teams then, I guess, in that sense. So I guess I'm going to have to switch over and pick a road team in this one because I think Texas Tech will be hoping for a bounce back after a disheartening performance that a lot of people weren't seeing coming against Baylor after they had such a hot start in the conference, and they know that they need to win now to continue to get back and be considered a conference competitor again. So I think they right the ship. They go get a road win this time, take down TCU. Who do you got though, Brad?
Yeah, I'm going Texas Tech again. Yeah, like you said, I think they're looking for a bounce back. TCU's had a hit or miss season. You are getting them at home, but I think that Texas Tech's just a better prepared team. It's going to be a little bit more motivated going into it from the jump. So, yeah, man, I'm keeping that road streak going, and I don't think it's going to change for a second.
All right, so both in agreement there on that one at least. Then we'll go down here. Of course, we talked about West Virginia and Arizona extensively. You can catch that one at 7 Eastern time on Fox Sports 1. We have Utah hitting the road to head to Houston. Night game there at Houston on ESPN Plus there, 7 o'clock Eastern kick. Utah, 1-3 in the conference. If we called anything here on the CRW, I mentioned this earlier, Brad, we called Utah not winning the Big 12 this year, not coming in and dominating like their fans were saying. So at least we got that right, but they're facing another struggling team in Houston. Who do you got getting the win here in this matchup?
Yeah, I've been hounded on Utah all year, but one of their fans did tweet out, and they said, "Can we please have a ceasefire?" I think Utah's been humbled. He's like, "I think Utah's been humbled enough. Can we just be friends?" And no, we can't. But I will. I do think Utah is going to be Houston. I just don't think Houston's hardly a football program this year. They're just not together whatsoever. So I think that Utah will walk into this one and walk out winning.
Yeah, there's not many games where I will pick Utah to get the win, but I am going to have to agree with you in this one and think that they do get it done on the road to Houston and get a win there that they're kind of in desperate need of right now themselves. Which then we have a rivalry game in Manhattan. One of the night games here. Either one of these two could have been game of the week, but we're going with the later one just because it has better implications for the conference standings. But Kansas State was always an interesting matchup. 8 o'clock p.m. in Manhattan, ESPN2, night game there for Kansas State. honestly, I think you can throw everything out in a rivalry game, so this one may end up being closer than people expect. But to me, Kansas State looked just as good as I expected them to kind of coming into the season. They were my pick to, finish first in the Big 12 conference, going back to my preseason Big 12 predictions. They kind of looked a little rusty starting off, but they're really starting to hit their stride now. And I think playing at home at night, I think they'll handle the interstate opponent there in Kansas and got the Wildcats getting a win here at home. What about you, Brad?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think Kansas State looked like a great team last weekend. Got good coaches. Um, Probably coming home for their homecoming. Kansas State's going to win this one by a lot.
Yeah, we're in agreement there, which brings us to our game of the week here. Week, is it week 9? I think in the Big 12, I believe, if I'm not
Mm-hmm.
mistaken. Cincinnati at Colorado, because both of these two teams are two teams that are up near the top half of the conference standings that I think not a lot of people expected to be there. You look at Colorado. I was not expecting them to have as good a year as they had. Cincinnati definitely seems like they were just a QB away, as I mentioned earlier. Sorbsby's done a great job, and so both of these two are now competing to remain a conference competitor moving forward and getting into the month of November where they'll be playing some meaningful football games. So this will be a very interesting matchup. It's our game of the week as Cincinnati hits the road to take on the Colorado Buffaloes on the road with that late kick there, 10:15 Eastern on ESPN. What do you think here, Brad? Two teams that have surprised and are looking like competitors here in the Big 12 this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not going to enjoy doing this, but I'm going to go with Colorado. Um, if we've been right on Utah this year, we've been wrong on Colorado.
Yeah,
And that's not out of thinking that they were a bad team. That's out of wanting them to be a bad team. It's out of pure hate, pure spite. Um, Nothing against the players, everything against the attitude.
yeah,
Uh, but they've just looked like an excellent team, man. They have
they
looked
have.
good. And so with this one, I think that getting them at home, I think that Colorado just has the upper hand here. I just don't see Cincinnati doing it.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing that I've had to eat crow on for sure is how good of a job Colorado's done this season. And I've been impressed to the point where I picked them last week. I think but this week I'm going to go back to my old ways. I think I'm going to go
Mm-hmm.
with Cincinnati to go on the road, pull what's probably considered an upset at this point, but my main reason is just play in the trenches. I think Cincinnati has a good D line, good offensive line, and that has kind of been Colorado's weakness. They've done a bit better job in that area this year, but we'll see if that really matches up when they play a team that's really solid in those areas like Cincinnati is. I think this is going to be a good football game, but it's going to be interesting to see what wins out there because Colorado's skill talent is unbelievable. And if they find a way to win this one, then we're talking about Colorado playing games in November, competing for a conference title, which great job and shout out to Coach Brown for doing that if they get it done. But it's definitely an interesting one to watch, and there's our picks there. And that's why it's our game of the week in our Around the Big 12 segment here. This week, week 9 in the conference here for our Arizona preview and predictions episode, where we've also wrapped up the Kansas State game, kind of put a bow on that one, talked a little bit about the state of the program and the Big 12 scores from last week before previewing and making our picks in those games this week. And then, of course, talking about the Mountaineers and Wildcats and providing our prediction for that game as well. But, Brad, any final thoughts, anything you want to mention here before we close up shop on episode 203 here of the CRW podcast?
Man, I know that Mountaineer Nation right now is all in toils and not knowing how to field, but there's still some games to play left. We'll see what happens. At this point in time, none of us is going to make the coaching change, and no banner flying over the stadium is going to change that. So sit back, cheer them on, and let's hope we can gather up some wins before the end of the season.
Yeah. So at least hopefully try to get to a bowl game, if nothing else at this point. I know it's a stinky goal to have, but it's kind of where we are right now. And, like I always say, you only get at minimum 12 opportunities to do this per year, cheer on the Mountaineers, and it's something we all enjoy. That's why we all, talk about it so much and watch content for it on YouTube and podcast form and all that stuff because we love the Mountaineers. So just enjoy the opportunity of getting to watch them, if nothing else, and cheer them on. As Brad said there, that's the main thing, and let the chips fall where they may moving forward with the future of the program. But all we can do every Saturday is cheer on the Mountaineers, and we'll be doing that along with you yet again in a live stream here on the channel. West Virginia's on the road, so we're going to do a watch along, a watch party stream here on the CRW. So come join us Saturday night. Turn the game on your TV. We'll have it on our end, and we'll commentate, of course, and we'll talk with you a little bit in the chat as well. we've had a lot of fun doing that throughout the season and continue to try to do it as much as possible. We'll do it again this Saturday for this game against Arizona. And then, of course, we'll be back to talk about it afterwards in a podcast episode next week, just like we have this week. And I appreciate you guys that have tuned into it, whether you watched the video version on YouTube. If you did that, just hit the thumbs up button before you head out. Giving us a like helps a ton with the YouTube algorithm. And be sure to subscribe here for a ton of Mountaineer football content moving forward through this season. And then, of course, throughout what may be a crazy offseason with a lot of news to talk about. So definitely want to tune into us here at the Country Roads Webcast as that develops. And we appreciate you listening on the audio side as well. You can find it on any podcast platform you like: Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon, you name it. Just search Country Roads Webcast and leave us a rating there. That helps us on that side, preferably a 5-star one if you would. And shout out to WV Sports Now for hosting our episodes on their website there at WVSportsNow.com. We're really appreciative of them for that. And we'll be back to talk about this one. Hopefully we have a positive result to talk about. We're needing it throughout Mountaineer Nation, but regardless, one thing we can all agree on is we love our Mountaineers, and we're going to be there to cheer them along the way. So looking forward to doing that in this game against Arizona as we wrap up here on episode 203 of the CRW podcast. For my co-host Bradley, as always, I'm Jordan Cruz. And until next time, let's go Mountaineers.
If you really want to know, then come on, let's go. Take a stroll down those